Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'm Terry Freeman. I'm president of the Community Foundation for the National Capital Region, and we're thrilled to welcome you here for the release of this research that has been done on tuition assistance programs in the region, now affectionately known as TAPs. Who knew? I didn't know. TAP program here in the region. And we have named this research Invest to Compete, because the idea here is that if we invest in existing workforce, they have a better chance of competing, thus our companies have a better chance of competing. The Invest to Compete initiative research was actually a partnership between the Community Foundation and the local community colleges, of which I believe we have Prince George's Community College is represented, Northern Virginia Community College, University of District of Columbia Community College, and Montgomery College, who could not be here because they had, unfortunately, a competing event this morning. What we have been able to discern with our partners is that tuition assistance programs are sorely underutilized resource for professional development, academic achievement, and for ability for people to receive post-secondary credentials. One of the things that the Community Foundation has dedicated itself to is workforce development and seeing how we might be able to assist in that arena. Let me just quickly tell you a little bit about the Community Foundation. We've been in this community since 1973, so we're getting ready to turn 40 next year. And our interest is really in helping the residents of this region take part in the prosperity of this region so that everyone can achieve economic security. This is not about foundation funding just to hand out money. This is about foundation funding to help people help themselves and achieve family economic security. Through our Greater Washington Workforce Development Collaborative, which is a part of the Community Foundation, we have been partnering with local corporations to work on issues workforce related. And one instance in particular, our Career Navigators program works with 5 area hospitals to look at just this issue. How can they take lower level skilled employees within their organizations, provide them with the resources to allow them to come up the ladder, and thus build a pipeline for the hospital. So this is good for the employee, it's good for the organization, and it's good for the community ultimately. We really are focused on helping people develop a competitive edge. And we know that that doesn't happen if you don't have a post-secondary credential. It just doesn't. We've heard lots of conventions speak over the past several weeks, and what we do know is that the idea of coming out of high school, getting a manufacturing job that is going to pay you a living wage and allow you to put your kids through college, those days are gone. So we have to figure out how we make sure that our folks have the skills that are needed to be able to move forward and live life as everyone would like to live life. Consider that according to the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, between now and 2018, over 70% of new jobs in our region are going to require a post-secondary education and training. Yet, according to the current census, more than 1.2 million of our working age neighbors do not have post-secondary credentials and are ill prepared for the jobs of the future. And I know that Jim will talk a little bit more about that as well. We know that within the DC metropolitan area, $70 million was spent by employers on undergraduate level tuition assistance programs and supported 23,000 existing employees. However, what we also know is that 36% of those companies did not spend their entire budget. So there's still money sitting there on the table, and you know, us folks that raise money, we never like money to sit on the table. We want to use all the money that is there. So we want to figure out how can we best help people utilize these dollars, but for their own benefit, excuse me. And we think that the sweet spot may be low-level lower skilled employees who have been at the corporations for a while, have showed loyalty, and just need a little help to move up that through the pipeline. So we think that may be the sweet spot for organizations. Our agenda today is going to begin with Jim Denneker. I'm not going to talk about the results of the research. And Jim is president of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, I know you all know. And he's going to give us the highlights of the Invest to Compete research. We'll follow his presentation with an opportunity to ask questions, and then Jonathan Rothwell, Senior Research Associate at the Brookings Institution, is going to moderate a panel that features Mr. David Miles, who is the Senior Director of Learning and Development at Sodexo, and Dr. Robert Templin, who is the President of Northern Virginia Community College. So Jim, would you please come up while I quickly review your bio and say how wonderful you are. The Invest to Compete partners have been thrilled to be able to work with the Greater Washington Board of Trade, and the Community Foundation works with the Board of Trade all the time to conduct this survey. Jim is a friend and a neighbor, and I'm not going to go into why I say that, but he is. Since July 2006 has been overseeing this regional organization representing the business interests for major companies throughout the region. As such, the Board of Trade puts its focus on the critical issues and opportunities here: transportation, emergency preparedness, and business continuity; green as a competitive advantage; and the workforce challenges of recruiting and retaining highly qualified people. Special emphasis is paid to economic development strategies that will advance the growth of this region, and the additional focus is provided on the important issues of stability in a challenging time. So Jim is going to walk us through the data. Jim?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I would like to walk us through the findings off of the survey that we conducted on behalf of this group. The Board of Trade was asked to partner up with the universities and community colleges to talk about where the business community intersects with the education community and where some opportunities reside. I will have to tell you that I was excited to go through the responses. It was encouraging to see the scope of the companies. Almost 100 companies were surveyed, responded in pretty short order, and that was, we won't talk about statistically valid or otherwise. There are a variety of different ways to slice this, but it really was meant to give us a strong sense of what's going on in the Greater Washington community. Now listen, I'm paid to brag on this region. That's my job. I'm getting pretty good at it. I'm not a very successful person at cocktail parties because they're like, move over to the corner. Yeah, we know this region's strong. Oh yeah, Bryce Harper. I brag on everything. Ooh, Redskins, we're in first place. I'm nonstop about it. This region's the strongest region in the country, economically speaking. We have some very serious problems, the haves and the have-nots, the discrepancy associated with the income levels. But beyond that, it's also an issue that we have among the larger companies. Typically, those are the ones that we represent at the Greater Washington Board of Trade. And those larger companies are actually having a heck of a time recruiting and retaining their employees. So you come here from Oklahoma, it's sticker shock. You fall off your chair when you start finding out that we would consider a $300,000 condo affordable housing. It's different here. We should price things in euros. It would make things a little bit easier in the translation. But that competitive advantage that we have needs to be supported, needs to be strengthened, and that pipeline isn't as strong as it needs to be. What we're discovering, and this survey bears it out, is that we really could grow more from within instead of constantly looking to import. You know, it's expensive to import when you're looking for moving allowances and the opportunities to even fly people in for interviews. It starts adding up. The companies, there are no dopes around here, the companies really do crunch those numbers and understand that if they put money into investing on the education for their current employees, it gives them the opportunity to reward the good employees, to motivate employees, but then to also continue their pipeline with people who are already involved with the company, we would hope loyal to the company, and certainly involved in the community. Greater Washington is the nation's #1 knowledge economy. We're the highest educated population in the United States by this region, highest. 47% of the population over the age of 25 holds a college degree, 22% holds an advanced degree, many of you in the room. And it's the doctors, and it's the lawyers, and it's the architects, and it's the engineers, and the MBAs, and they're surrounding this region. It's so much higher than any place else. You know, the default is Boston. Everybody thinks of that as sort of the knowledge capital. We're at 47% for the age of 25 and older for the people with college degrees, and in Boston it's 37%. So we beat Boston. See how it rolls off the tongue. So at a time when the region is looking for people with the right skills, many companies have the opportunity to hire from within. Tuition assistance programs are not just a benefit for employees, they actually represent a true investment in the corporation's own company. The Invest to Compete survey was administered online between May and June of 2012, to give you the details. 95 respondents included large and small employers from suburban Maryland, District of Columbia, Northern Virginia, the Board of Trade's region, and certainly the region covered by the universities and colleges represented in the room. The employers that responded to the survey spend approximately $8 million annually on tuition assistance. That's just of those 95 companies, benefiting nearly 8,200 workers. Now, when you start to think about the companies I'm talking about, you'll hear from Sodexo, and we're not sourcing specific companies with the findings, but the likes of Booz Allen Hamilton's, the Deloitte's, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, the SAIC's, the Lockheed's, they're all here. And I have to tell you, yesterday I'm at lunch with the CEO of Vita Fitness. He owns several companies, Bang Hair Salon, and then also Capital City Brewery. Those are the three companies he's got. David Von Stork. I'm also sitting with the Dean of the School of Business for American University. And we're just having a conversation on making the introductions around lunch. And I said, David, why don't you just tell everybody here how many people you've got employed? Bang Hair Salon, Vita Fitness, Capital City Brewery. He says 2,000. I could have picked the dean up off the floor. Not a company he'd ever heard of, 2,000 employees right here. These are the types of companies that I'm talking about, and he's motivated to keep his employees. And there's some phenomenal opportunities for professional development within his companies and certainly within his management of the companies. But there are some companies that are somewhat under the radar screen that are not the Booz Allen Hamiltons. There's a lot of visibility among those bigger companies, but sometimes those mid-sized companies do quite well, and they're the lifeblood of so much that goes on in Greater Washington. So let's open it up with a number of different slides. Nearly 90% of the organizations surveyed reported that they offer formal professional development support for their current employees, inside and outside of the university system, but 90% of the organizations surveyed reported that they have this professional development support for their current employees. It could be programs on sales, could be programs on negotiation, public speaking, right on through, but I'll break this down as we start to get into more detail about the university sector. The likelihood of offering such benefits increases, of course, with the size of the firm. Among large companies, 95% offer professional development. Percentages of medium-sized companies and small businesses offering such benefits are 86% and 76% respectively. A significant portion of firms, about 75%, offer formal tuition assistance programs for their employees. It's where we want to spend the majority of our focus today. Again, larger companies are more likely to grant such assistance for their than smaller firms. About 83% of large companies, 76% of the mid-sized companies, and 47% of smaller companies feature tuition assistance programs. There's growth opportunity within all three of those categories. Obviously, with the smaller companies, there's the largest opportunity for growth, but it's right now a very difficult time. We're thrilled to know that 70 or 47% of those smaller firms are kicking in some money, and it was not just $50 here and $50 there, and here's a gift card to Starbucks. There's some real money. We'll talk about that, what has been put on the table, as well as what Terry referred to as the money that's being left on the table. Tuition assistance programs help manage the risk of employee departures. Now it's a bit of the enlightened self-interest on behalf of the employer. Employers target this investment for workers who are most likely to remain with the company. Someone who's got their resume out there on LinkedIn, they have to be careful. I gotta get their tuition assistance. but by limiting eligibility to full-time and salaried workers is typically the way that this is done, and by imposing a waiting period for new hires that averages 8 months. You know, with the Generation X right now, they like to be vice president day one. Where's my corner office? All right, I'm overstating that. But you do have to establish that you're part of the company. You're not just going to come on in, get the tuition assistance, and fly away. And so there's a lot to be said for how this relates to the benefits to the employer as well. If a benefiting employee leaves the organization, 64% require a payback, most often if the departure occurs within 1 year. Be happy to share with you some of the samples from our members about how they have this, not as a contract, but at least within the employee manual. When you get the tuition assistance, you sign up for that program. There is a specific form in most organizations that says, here's how this works. It's almost a promissory note. We'll pay for this. We'll talk about grades in a second. We'll pay for this, but if you leave within, let's say, a year, and that's typically the departure date, it gets paid back. And so we'd be happy to share that information with you on the practical side. The maximum amount of tuition assistance available to Greater Washington employees varies from firm to firm. Nearly 70% of the firms have per employee annual assistance limits of between $2,000 and $9,999. The remaining 30% of the companies that responded and provide tuition assistance are equally split between those with annual limits of less than $2,000 and those with limits exceeding $10,000. And I know we talk about this being tuition assistance program, but partly if the companies did a better job of marketing, they would call it scholarship programs, because when you're looking at $2,000, $4,000, $10,000 and above to underwrite different programs, it really is the equivalent of a scholarship program, but we fall into the vernacular of Washington TAP. Larger firms are able to offer more generous limits compared to their smaller counterparts. Still, this difference is relatively small. The average limit of larger firms was nearly $5,400 annually. The comparable figure for small businesses was $4,600 each year. And in homage to the university sector, if you turn your head on this slide, you'll recognize the peace symbol, but you really have to work at it. Okay. Most companies require that employer-funded courses be directly related to either an employee's current job or broader career goals to be approved for coverage. So I'm working government affairs over at the American Institute of Architects. I'm the vice president for government affairs there, and somebody comes in and she wants tuition assistance, and she makes a very strong case, except she was looking to study broadcast journalism. I was like, I got no need for that. It really did need to relate for what we were looking to do within the American Institute of Architects and the Government Affairs shop. I certainly wished her well, and she's doing voiceovers now. I'm thrilled, but we didn't pay for that because we didn't have the money to be able to do it. For that, we needed more specifically related to what we were doing in the career goals for the organization as well. So it really is a back and forth shared responsibility. In addition, companies in Greater Washington also typically condition tuition eligibility on the achievement of a minimum grade by the participating employee, and that typically is C or better, though I will tell you that varies greatly. And when I say varies greatly, it does not go below C, but it is pretty tough in terms of what the expectation is for certain grades on certain dollars. Some scale it based on the grades, and some will not give you any money unless it's a B or better, an A or better. Different advanced degrees have different requirements as well, but I will tell you that that's not the reason that the money's being left on the table. Companies do share the risk with employees. Most, about 70%, use a reimbursement model in which the employee does pay the tuition up front, with the reimbursement contingent upon successful classroom performance. The majority of employers, 58%, ask the benefiting employee to pay some portion of the overall tuition. So this isn't, unless it's an assigned class, unless it's specifically something that you're asked to complete, and the employer is pushing you to complete. It's typically a shared cost with the benefiting employee, but it's still a very significant, I'll call it, scholarship program from the employer. And then the last slide being that businesses in the Greater Washington region often require employees to remain at the firm. So you've heard of golden handcuffs. I would kind of call this detention. Stay for a while, for a period of time at least, after participating in their tuition assistance program. Look, you don't want to invest in an employee and then have them fly the coop, as it were. More than 60% of the large companies have such a requirement. Again, happy to share that type of language from different companies of how it works, practically speaking. But while approximately half of all small companies condition tuition reimbursement on employees remaining at the firm for some period of time. That's typically at least 1 year. That's the more or less what I would say is the basis. I'll go with one more comment. Annual expenditures for tuition assistance at most of the Greater Washington companies come in under budget. In fact, expense and risk management methods were so effective that surprisingly 36% of respondents report that their tuition assistance budget had unspent funds at the end of the fiscal year. Again, that's not based on grades. That really is based on either people not applying for the funds, the company's not doing as much and good a job as they can to get word out about those funds. But unfortunately, what we found is that that's not as effective in terms of not just the communication to the employees, but it's just, I think, the fact that the companies are struggling with this program, and there's some real opportunity for the universities to step in and do a better job of marketing to those companies, how they can help them, I'll say, spend those funds, but engage their employees. Employer assistance, tuition assistance programs have largely survived the recession. And that was, I think, a surprise to us. You'd think that this would be along the lines of the marketing programs and the advertising programs, and one of those things that gets cut out of even employee benefits. But the employers really do see this as an investment back into the company, doing the right thing for the employees, doing the right thing for the overall company. So while a majority of companies reported that flat budgets happened over the past several years, surprisingly 23% have actually increased their tuition assistance budgets following the recession. So the money's continuing to go in for the tuition assistance programs. We do have concerns about how much money is being left on the table. You remember at Washington, if it's not spent, then that's all you get for the next year. Well, that's kind of the government mindset. We don't want that to translate at all to these types of programs, but there are concerns associated with if it's not spent, then why would the employer put that same amount of money on the table? While it's on the table, we want to work with the university sector to get it off the table, to strengthen the companies, strengthen the employee base, and certainly in great partnership with the university, spend that money where it needs to be spent with the qualified institutions. So with that, Terry, I'll be happy to open it up for questions. I know we're going to get to the panel in short order, but see if there are any questions about the data or any of the other comments. Be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll go right into Jonathan. Anybody? A real university crowd. I'd like to bring Jonathan Rothwell to the podium. Jonathan Rothwell is a senior research associate and associate fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program. His research focuses on urban economics, innovation, human capital, and economic opportunity. Since joining Brookings in 2009, he has authored or co-authored reports on international exports from metropolitan areas, the size, location, and characteristics of green jobs, how mismatches in the supply and demand for worker education affect unemployment, and how the availability of the affordable housing and zoning policies affect educational opportunities. He is a frequent contributor to the Avenue blog at the New Republic, and he has published academic papers in journals such as Urban Studies, Urban Affairs, American Law, and Economics Review. He earned a Bachelor of Science from Penn State, a master's degree in economics from the New School, and a PhD in policy from Princeton University. His newest report, and the reason he's here today, is Education, Job Openings, and Unemployment in Metropolitan America. It was released just 2 weeks ago, and in it, Jonathan shows how the degree of balance between the supply of and demand for education affects unemployment and job openings in metropolitan labor markets. I won't tell you how it ends, but Jonathan will. While his findings do highlight the fact that our regional economy is a mighty generator of skilled workers and is in many respects better situated than others, that bragging part I do, it does underscore the need for continued work to maintain our region's competitive advantage. Thank you very much for having me. Please welcome